Good morning, everyone. Distinguished panelists, respected Director Dr. Manoj K. Tiwari sir, Dean Student Affairs Dr. Hema Date ma'am, esteemed guests and invitees, honorable faculty members, officers and staff of NITIE, media personnel, and my dear friends. It is with much pride and elation that I welcome you all to the Prerana Business Meet 2020, an integral part of our Avartan. NITIE's annual business festival that encompasses business, culture, and sport. The Prerana Business Meet has traditionally brought together some of India's highly illustrious leaders to discuss and share their views on the trends and contemporary issues of the industry. This year, we have lined up some of India's best CEOs to enlighten us on the central theme of building self-reliant India, an invaluable part of global economy. The National Institute of Industrial Engineering was established in the year 1963 by the Government of India and the United Nations International Labour Organization. The endeavor was to create a center of excellence that would generate solutions to the conundrums of an aggressively expanding industrial order and to upskill the next generation of techno managers. Avartan, the annual management festival of NITIE Mumbai, has been the epitome for fostering industrial relations since 1995. In its 2 decades of inspiring solutions, Avartan presents a unique panorama of corporate and academic arenas to foster excellence and innovation involving management concepts and practices. I welcome you all to the Prerana Business Meet of Avartan 2020. I now request Dean Student Affairs Professor Hema Date to welcome the esteemed guest, Mr. Shailesh Pathak, CEO, L&T Infrastructure Development Projects Limited, to NITIE Mumbai and deliver the welcome speech.
Thank you, Akash. Good morning to everybody. It is indeed a matter of great pride and elation for us to welcome Mr. Shailesh Pathak, CEO of L&T Infrastructure Development Projects Limited, for Prerana Business Meet 2020. You're welcome, sir. Mr. Pathak has over 3 decades of experience shared evenly between the private sectors and Government of India's IAS, Indian Administrative Services. Prior to joining IAS, he had 4 years investment banking stint at ICICI Mumbai and HSBC. He rejoined the private sector in 2006 in IDFC. A part of the G20 Nations Business Group B20, he served as a member in the Finance and Infrastructure Task Force of B20 Saudi Arabia 2020 and Infrastructure Task Forces Argentina 2018, Germany 2017, and China 2016. He has been an integral part of the BRICS Business Council Infrastructure Working Group and has served on national committees of leading business chambers of infrastructure. Mr. Pathak is also a committed environmentalist and a trekking enthusiast and has a diploma in ornithology. We are all excited to have you with us here at NITIE Mumbai and learn from you your wisdom and expertise. Without further ado, I welcome the moderator of morning, Professor Utpal, to take the session forward. Professor Utpal, please.
Thank you, madam. And good morning to one and all. We are very happy today that as part of our Avartan event in 2020, we are very happy today that as part of our Avartan 2020 and particularly as a part of our Prerana Business Meet, we have got someone with us who is highly experienced, not only in the current position or not only in the private sector, but he had its stint in government. So I think we are very lucky to have him, sir, Mr. Shailesh Pathak, sir, as one of the leading persons who have a deep knowledge of infrastructure development in the country from his current experience as well as his past experience in the government. And he will speak on the theme Cities and Infrastructure of India in 2020. Of course, all of us are eagerly waiting to listen from Pathak sir. And but before he starts his keynote speaker today, I would like to make one or two quick points here. We have seen that in the recent past that how infrastructure development has taken the mainstay of governance. Of course, infrastructure is a key input to all economic activities, whether it is industry, agriculture, trading, transportation. And we have witnessed during the last 2 or 3 decades that how infrastructure in India has developed. I think if we look at the cities today and the cities that we have seen 2, 3 decades before, I think the change is very much apparent, it's very much visible. And these cities and the infrastructure development has now become the mainstay of development and governance today. Particularly, you have seen during the pandemic situation, how there has been a reverse migration sort of thing that where people from the cities have moved back to their villages for safety reasons. And that also shows that even today, in spite of so much of development which has taken place in the last few decades, the cities have remained the hotspots of economic activities. And there is still a huge divide between the cities and the villages or the so-called rural areas. So obviously, when cities have the responsibility to absorb not only those who are already in the cities, but also have the responsibility to provide employment opportunities, provide livelihood for others who may not be permanently staying in the cities, but will definitely come during occasions or during seasons for job opportunity and work for a few months or maybe the entire year. And at times they may go back to their respective places. So to that extent, the infrastructure development in general and infrastructure development in cities have become very key to our overall economic growth and prosperity. I think I must thank the team Prerana Management Group that they have chosen such an important topic for this year's Prerana Business Meet Talks. And I think we are very fortunate that we have the right person amongst us today, who is none other than Mr. Shailesh Pathak sir. So without taking much of time, I would now humbly request Shailesh Pathak sir to deliver his keynote address today. And sir, after your first round of speech is over actually, so as a moderator, I may have to ask you a few questions. I may have to ask some of the questions on my own or questions from my students, because a majority of attendants today are our students. So obviously, I have that responsibility, which I'll do only after your lecture is over, sir. And now I welcome you, sir, to please proceed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Utpal, and thank you, Professor Hema, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for inviting me. I am in very august company. There are 8 top-notch speakers, and I feel privileged to be part of this speakers group. And I also feel privileged to be part of the NITIE community, the NITIE community. You have such an amazing campus. Our offices are very close to that in Powai. And I know that most of you would not be in campus right now. Most of you would be home for the last few months. But I'm looking forward to visiting your campus as and when things open up. So I do not intend to give a keynote speech. I just need to learn as much from younger and smarter people like you as you would learn from me. So without further ado, let me just tell you what I know about the audience, which is the students of NITIE. I know that there's a 500 batch strength, so there are 1,000 people, out of which maybe 100 are on campus and 900 are at home. And I'm sure that those 900, your parents would be very happy to see you for such a long time at home after a long time, because you would have done your engineering. And then finally, they're getting to see you at home. I hope the experience is good. The food would certainly be good. The second is that most of you are around 25. So most of you students would be born between, let us say, 1990 and 1999. So let me begin with a story around the time that you were born. You know, India today is a very different place. Around the time that you were born, and this is not going to be pleasant to hear, but there was a testimony by a US a department official in US Congress. I'm trying to search for it, please help me. In which there was an analysis of which countries matter to the US, the United States. Whether we like it or not, a statement was that India is the largest unimportant country in the world. This is the time that you were born. But the future is more important than the past. So let's go to the future. I don't know if some of you have seen my Twitter handle, but if you can see this screen, please confirm. It's at SHYPK, and my pinned tweet is what I'll show you just now. This is the future. I'll play it at least 3-4 times, because the top 10 economies in the world, India was not part of the top 10 economies till 2009. And by 2030, that is in your career, from nowhere, we will become number 3. So once again, we'll start at 1970. United States and Japan and Germany were numbered 1, 2, 3. France, Italy, and so on and so forth, around the time that you were born. Now, it's 2002, India is nowhere there. It's 2008, India is just entering here in 2011, by which time most of you would have been in school, right? And then we are around 2020, when India has overtaken Germany and the United Kingdom. US, China, and Japan are ahead of us. Around 2028 to 9, we overtake Japan. So actually, your generation is one of the luckiest generations to be born in India. Because when our overall economy rises and becomes bigger, the voice of India and the voice of young Indians like you will be heard far and wide across the globe. Professor Hema's, Utpalji's, my parents' generation was perhaps the most unfortunate, because so if you look at some other animations, it's on my Twitter feed. Actually, India was in the top 10 countries in the world by GDP in 1960. But because of terrible economic choices, we dropped out of the top 10 and we came back by around 64, 65, and we came back only in 2009. Why I'm talking about this? The topic today is infrastructure and cities in 2030. We know what is in 2020. But in the next 10 years, this is the best time for a young Indian to be around in India. Yeah. So that's the first good news. Despite what the 1995 kind of State Department comment was. The second piece of good news is that infrastructure is rapidly improving in India. So for those of you who are interested, my Twitter feed has a link to my LinkedIn page. And I have actually 2 articles on this. One I wrote just before May 2014, when I sort of tried to forecast what would happen in India in the next 5 years. Have a look. Much of that has happened. And then in 2019, May, June, I said, all right, this is what happened in the last 5 years. This might happen in the next 5 years, which is still 2024. Have a look. Most sensible people give forecasts for 30 years, 50 years, by which time most people will be dead and nobody will question whether they were right or wrong. But I am giving you a 5-year forecast. And in this talk, we are talking about what might happen in India from 2020 to 2030. So the second piece of good news is a lot has improved since you were born. Now let me come to the third point. The first was you're so lucky to be entering the workforce now. Because the rising tide will lift all boats, including yours. The second is much has changed since you were born. Much has changed for the better. And just a small story here. I remember the announcement of the Golden Quadrilateral. The Golden Quadrilateral was this highway connecting Delhi, Bombay, Calcutta, Madras. And this was announced sometime in 1999 by the Prime Minister. And one very noted journalist, she lives in Mumbai, in fact, has a column on the Indian Express every Sunday. So this noted journalist, she wrote that this is Mungeri Lal ke haseen sapne. Ye kabhi nahi ho sakta Hindustan mein. Thankfully, she was wrong. And thankfully, even today, the critics who keep saying nothing is happening for the better will be in the dustbins of history 10 years down the line. Yeah. So incidentally, this is a personal story. I used to be working in ICICI Bombay, as it then was. And I had a small Maruti car, which in 1990 was a very advanced car. And I decided to drive from Bombay to Delhi. It took me 3.5, 4 days. We had to stop at Surat, then Udaipur, then Ajmer. And then finally we came to Delhi. In 3 years, I'll be able to drive the entire journey in 12 hours, maybe 14. Because a direct expressway is going to connect, actually no, slightly longer, but certainly less than 24 hours. So this is the kind of change that has happened. So that's the second good thing. The third major thing that you should know is a story that Mr. K.V. Kamath told us. K.V. Kamath, ICICI Bank, New Development Bank, the BRICS Bank, all of you should know him if you don't. So KVK, as we used to call him, KVK said, typically the per capita income of a country determines its governance priorities. And this is a story that I want you guys to remember. He said he had moved to Asian Development Bank in around 1988. And he had moved around the ASEAN region, the Asian tigers, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines. So he says there's a clear correlation between the per capita income of a country and its economic priorities. So he says when per capita income is less than $500 US, it means that most people in this country are poor. There are very, very few rich people, right? So the priority is food, shelter, clothing, roti, kapda, makan. And that is what the leaders of the country work towards. When per capita income rises and you hit between, let's say, 1,500 US annual, then suddenly some people get more money. On white goods, they spend on shopping, and that is when they start going out for foreign vacations, right? So malls and multiplexes come up. People need to spend their money, so the market caters to that. But a lot of people are still poor, right? So what is the overriding focus? Consumerism. Okay. Then a stage comes when your per capita income actually crosses $2,000 US. And suddenly what happens is many more people have the money. A lot of people are still poor, but many more people have the money. And what do they need? They need better governance. They need better infrastructure. And once this $2,000 thing is crossed as a milestone, then the politics of the country changes for the better. Then the leaders know that better governance and better infrastructure is going to deliver votes to them. And whether you like it or not, the political elected leaders are the smartest people in this country. They know exactly what the citizens want. So you have a food, shelter, clothing phase. Then you have a consumerism phase, which is about the time that you got your first mobile phone and you guys were teenagers going to movies. And then you have a better governance, better infrastructure phase. So the second most sensible people in this country, set of people after the politicians, is Bollywood. Bollywood knows what the audience wants. So when Professor Hema and Utpal ji were in school, we used to have movies like Roti, Kapda aur Makan with Manoj Kumar going like this, right? In the late 90s, when people started having money, you had movies like Shan, Jeete hain Shan se, marte hain Shan se. It was about spend it till you drop it. Yeah. Now you have movies like Peoply Live and Shanghai that talk about why the system cannot be better. So now that India has crossed the $2,000 per capita income mark, there is no looking back. The politics of 1970 and the politics of 2020 are very different. But this is the fourth most important point. We've talked about the evolution of economies per capita income. The fourth most important point is that more will change in the next 10 years between November 2020 to November 2030 than has changed since you were born, than has changed since 1980, than has changed since this animation 1970. So actually, this is a great time for you guys in NITIE. And I'm told that all of you are engineers and 20% are women. So I'm sure that both the women and the men want that 20% to rise up to 50%. So you have everything going for you. Right. So these were the first 4 points that I wanted you to remember. I'm actually happy to take questions now, but let me just make a couple of other points about infrastructure. Check up whatever I've written about 2014 to 2019 and 2019 to 2024. But I'd actually like to spend some time on cities. And I'm happy to take all questions, including professional, business, personal. So let's talk about cities. And whether we like it or not, most of you 900 people are actually in your homes in various cities in India, whether we like it or not. Not very many would be in their ancestral village. I also have an ancestral village. But today, would I want to spend the next 5 years there? Probably not. I'd probably be in a city. Now, typically what happens is as economies grow, they start with a very high rural population, and then the migration towards cities start. And when they are very advanced, they end up with most of their population in urban areas, in cities. And this is no surprise. This has happened. In fact, when I was in Oxford in 2011, I actually did a comparison between UK urbanization and Indian urbanization. And I realized that in 1800, more than 80% of UK's population was rural, lived in villages. And then there was this huge migration to cities. And by around 1950, 80% of UK's population was urban. And when cities have such influxes of people, they become much bigger very, very quickly, and civic services go for a toss. So actually, if you've read Charles Dickens and The Tale of Two Cities and all that, he's basically writing about decaying cities like London at that time. And that pretty much describes what India's cities are going through. We have 53 cities with a population of more than 10 lakhs, million plus cities. Let me just show you a map. I was actually talking about this aspect in a conference that we had with African friends. And this is the map that I want you guys to have a look at. Check out where your city is in this. So let me say this. When the students of NITIE were born, these lights were half as big. Yeah. These are night lights, very accurate indicator of economic activity. So if you can see my cursor, you have Mumbai here, you have Delhi, Kolkata, Chennai, Bangalore, and Hyderabad. And here I'd like to stop and say, all these 6 top cities of India have 6 different languages. And as Indians, we should be proud of our linguistic diversity. There is no other country in the world that has 6 largest cities with 6 different languages. So what's the forecast? The forecast is the size of these dots, whether we like it or not, the size of these dots, these lights, will become at least double in the next 15 years, at least double. So whichever city you grew up in India is now double the size than when you started going to school, and will become double the size by the time your grandchildren start going to school. So this is the kind of urbanization that we are going to have. And therefore, if you look at infrastructure, apart from some network infrastructure, most infrastructure is about cities. So which are the things that are not in urban infrastructure? Roads is not. Railway networks is not. Oil pipelines is not. Electricity transmission lines is not. Waterways is not. Airports is urban infrastructure. High-speed rail is urban infrastructure because it connects cities. Airports connect cities. There's nothing in the middle. Water, to a large extent, required for cities, urban infrastructure. So apart from, let's say, agriculture and non-farm activities in rural areas, most of your working careers are going to be spent on working for opportunities in cities. And I'd just like to conclude here. I don't want to have a long keynote by saying that, in the next 30, 40 years, so many of you will become great business leaders. So many of you will become leaders otherwise, except in business. People will pursue different passions. So many of you will decide after 20, 25 years that you will not work anymore. And some of you who refuse to change with the times will fall by the wayside. That is life. All you have to ensure is you are not part of the last category. And there I'll only say that the 2 things that I, as a leader, look at in my team is an open mind and a positive attitude. An open mind keeps learning. An open mind considers all shades of views. It just does not go to one part of the argument and stay there. It looks at the other side of the argument. And a positive attitude is essential because there are so many negative people in the world who've never made a success of anything. Right? So the optimist and the pessimist will say, oh my God, nothing is going right. The COVID pandemic has flattened the Indian economy. The optimist will go and sell more motorcycles. Yeah. So be an optimist, have a positive attitude, and be a curious learner. Keep learning. I would like to learn from you guys. So here's my open offer. My Twitter feed is open. If there's anything, including very uncomfortable questions, which you don't want to send to Professor Utpal and Professor Hema, put it in my Twitter feed. I'll answer them also. All right. So that's all for now. I'll look forward to the interaction. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. In fact, the way you were speaking and the way you were narrating the things, to begin with the 3-4 points and all sort of good news for our students. And I was almost mesmerized the way you were speaking. And I was hoping that it goes on. The way our infrastructure in India goes on. And I was also feeling very proud today. And also I thank my students for giving me the opportunity, particularly to be part of this session and have an interaction with people like you. So before I take the students' viewpoint, I have a few curiosities, and I would like to know your viewpoints and reactions to that. I typically come from a village in West Bengal, which is 250 kilometers plus from the Calcutta airport. And the first 2 decades of my life, roughly, I have spent in my village, which those days had no electricity, no all other road, and what we called so-called as infrastructure, nothing was there. But the next 3 decades of my life, fortunately or unfortunately, I have spent in the cities like Calcutta, where I have studied my graduation and post-graduation. And then for work, I have been spending last 3 decades in cities like Chennai, Delhi, and now in Mumbai. So I have seen actually in my eyes that how the cities have changed, how infrastructure have changed. In fact, that entire metro project and the Commonwealth Games, etc. I've seen how it is happening. We are seeing things happening in Mumbai. But still, I feel that there's a huge gap between India and many other countries, not only the developed countries, even the developing countries with respect to infrastructure development. Like it takes only 2.5 hours maximum to reach from Mumbai to Kolkata. But when I actually travel, even in a hired car from Calcutta airport to my village, it doesn't take less than 5 and 6 hours, though road conditions have improved drastically. And also we see that even in the cities, the infrastructure, the pace of development of the infrastructure is very slow. The second airport in Mumbai, even today, there's a newspaper, in the today's newspaper, Times of India, it seems CIDCO has been told to speed it up and to set up the deadline. I feel it is still a little disappointing as a citizen. Of course, I know some of the reasons. So, sir, what your take on this issue? Like when the pace of development of infrastructure will really will be taken up to a higher level, and how long it will take for India to bridge the gap with respect to infrastructure development between the urban and rural areas? Thank you, sir.
Shoti kotha Utpal Babu. Khub bhalo. So I actually spent 2 years of my life in Kolkata, Calcutta as it then was.
Sir, I saw you. You're there with Shrey.
No. Joka management.
Acha, I am Calcutta. Okay.
So I have great fondness for the city of joy. But I must say that when I joined there in 1986, the metro in Kolkata was actually operational for 4 stations. And I must say that nothing happened thereafter. It is only when the Delhi metro started in the first decade of the 2000s that people got enthused about metros. And therefore, your point is absolutely valid. That was then. Compared to now, I don't want to talk about politics here, but as in 2020, we have 24/7 power in most villages in the country. In the next 3 years, can you believe it? Every household in villages in India will have a piped water connection. And don't believe me, go to the dashboard. It's called the Jal Jeevan Mission. So these are surprising things that are happening in an India where in an India of 1990, you would have never thought it was possible. And one of the reasons for optimism is that you need money for infrastructure. And the money has to come from either corporate savings or household savings. Suddenly, as Indian per capita income is going up, the tax revenues of India are also going up. And that gives you more leeway to spend on these programs. Happily, digitalization is happening. Because of digitalization, corruption is going down. So whatever was going into private pockets is now going to be spent on public projects. Let me give you two examples here. In November 2020 versus November 2016. Now, our company runs a bunch of toll roads in India. Out of every 100 rupees that we collected exactly 4 years ago in November 2016, 98 rupees was in cash. 2 rupees was electronic. Today, 74 is digital, electronic. So from 2 rupees to 74 rupees electronic collection. And I'm confident that this will hit 90% by next November. So there is no more cash. The scope for corruption also reduces, right? Let me give you a second example. I don't know if some of you have the UPI apps installed on your phone, the unified payment interface. But in 10 seconds, I can send money using my mobile phone to Akash Chawla at UPI. This I would never have thought possible, even when these guys were born. Certainly not when Utpal Babu, you were born. So suddenly, you have a bunch of young Indians with mobile phones with the cheapest data in the world and with digital infrastructure that is better than any country else except maybe Estonia. So suddenly a lot of good things are going to happen, right? And this has happened in the last 10 years. Who knew about the fact that all of us would have a unique biometric ID linked to the fingerprints and the iris? Who knew that because of this is digital infrastructure, the poor of this country would be able to get very easily mobile phones because the KYC norms will be easy. And who knew that because of the Aadhaar and the mobile phone, they would actually get a bank account. So 41 crore, 410 million. That's probably more than the population of the United States. 410 million people got bank accounts from 2014 to 2020, new bank accounts. And had it not been for this digital infrastructure, had we had COVID without this digital infrastructure, can you imagine sending so many thousands of crores into poor people's bank account? Never would it have taken off. And then we have GST. Of course, we in business have had our teething troubles with GST, but suddenly compliance is easier than non-compliance, right? Because invoice matching can happen. E-way bills can be traced. So whether we like it or not, a lot of India was informal. Now it is becoming formal. And the people who are losing out are kicking and screaming. God bless them. But when the cost of compliance is less than the cost of non-compliance, all countries have a virtuous cycle. America was a horrible country in terms of corruption in the 1920s. Chicago was run by the mob. How did America suddenly turn from being such a corrupt country to a non-corrupt country? We are going through that cycle now. And my personal answer is that in 1933 to 1945, there was a president who gave a new deal to America. So from 1933 to 1945, so many things changed in America. I think we are living in that transition. And the future, as I keep saying, is that next time you could never take a flight from Calcutta to Bombay till you are around 30, because it was just so expensive. And these young ladies and young gentlemen keep taking flights all the time. So the next time you drive from Kolkata to your ancestral village, I hope that you have a much better experience in road furniture and road usage. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Apart from the way you speak, what I admire most in you is your optimism. In fact, you are very right that many of us have seen the way the things are changing. It is not only just infrastructure, it is actually the technology, it is everything, the way we live and do business today was unthinkable maybe a decade before. And really it excites us that we are now in 2020 and what is going to happen in 2030. Now coming back to some of the questions or curiosities that our students have. Sir, you have noticed in the recent time due to pandemic things or economic activities got disrupted, and infrastructure section is no exception to that. In fact, we know that many of the companies who are building big infrastructure projects, housing, roadways, they were one of the activities which got affected even in the initial stages when they were told to stop their activities. And the workers started moving from the sites to their homes and then finally to their villages. So I hope that pandemic or disruptions of this kind of or this magnitude happens in future. But you never know. Future is so uncertain. The time is very dynamic today. So, sir, our students would like to know in a situation like this when disruptions happen. So, what special things or what something new to be done to deal with this new normal situation when there is difficulty with respect to movement of materials, movement of people, and still you have a target to build your infrastructure in time. So this I would like to know from your individual perspective as well as from your perspective of the L&T IDPL. Right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me begin with a macro number and come down to a micro number, right? The macro number is that GST collections are an indication of India's formal economy, goods and services tax. And our company's toll collections include the informal economy also, right? So I remember that GST collections were around more than 1 lakh crore in February. And now in October, they're back to more than 1 lakh crore. So the extent of disruption actually is considerably lower. Let's come down to the micro, which is our company's analysis. We collect toll, as I said. Our toll collections in September were more than what we collected in September last year. Our collections in October were much more than what we collected in October last year. So both the GST and the toll collection indicators show that we are well on our way bouncing back. And when we analyze the traffic on our India's roads, you know, everything else had recovered by September, except two categories. One was manufacturing products, and the second was building materials, including cement. Even these two categories have recovered in October. And unless, we have a severe second wave and a lockdown, I don't think we are looking back. The pandemic economic crisis is well and truly behind us, right? One would only hope that going forward, we do not have unnecessary lockdowns, because there is nothing to be accomplished by a lockdown now, which was not accomplished in April and May. And I'm sure that all of you are following the use of masks, the washing of hands, and physical distancing. After this, we'll continue and live on. I mean, look at 1915 or 1919. The Spanish flu had killed so many more people. But the world came out of that, and we did not have technology to talk like this at that time. But the world bounced back so quickly that by 1925, you had a huge bull run. In fact, culminating in the great crash of 1929, which led to the Securities Act in 1933, the Glass-Steagall Act. So human beings are resilient, and we will adapt. We have already adapted. Did you last November think of having such webinars on Zoom? Not really. And let me add one more thing why I'm confident. You know, the individual in India, apart from some of us who speak English, maybe 6% of the population, not more than that, speaks English in India. So we always had access to credit. But because of the digital infrastructure that I was talking about, the next step after UPI is something called PDI. And I'm sure the smart and young set here knows about it. This is public digital infrastructure. And Nandan Nilekani has been talking about it for 2 years. He says that why should the Amazons of the world own the data about us? We should control our own data. So if I have to, let us say, go for a life insurance premium, and my data for the last 5 health checkups shows that I have no problem, I should get a lower insurance premium. So I will control whether the life insurance company gets my data. And at a press of a button, they'll have. So some, lot of you may have drivers. Those drivers have a credit history. When they go for a small loan, they can share that credit history with the lending agency and get a lower rate of interest. So these are the things that I'm quite hopeful about, that by 2030 this bunch of young and smart people will change India.
Thank you, sir. Now another
sir,
question.
I have one question on Twitter also.
Yeah.
So from one of your
please go ahead, sir.
So I will I'll not mention the name, but the question is, with respect to our logistics sector, how do you see our dependence on road transport in the coming years, considering it accounts for maximum pollution? Thank you. Very good question. I will not mention the name, but the answer is very simple. There is a hierarchy of least pollution, which is waterways, right? So ultimately, transport is nothing but moving either a person or a product from point A to point B in the quickest possible time, in the least possible cost. So actually, waterways is one of the best, the least possible cost. It might take a little bit of extra time. And something like a European network of waterways is very extensively utilized. The second is actually railways. And the shift in the railways carrying capacity versus what we carry through roads. In 1950, 70% of our commodities were moved by railways. Today, it is the other way around. And that is also to do with the hitherto lack of progress in the railways hardware and software. But that's going to change. I'll just talk about it. Then you have the road transport area, and then of course you have for urgent expensive cargo, air. So the modal shift between the roads and the rail, what is likely to happen is that in the next November of 2021, the Western Dedicated Freight Corridor will become operational. So a container going between, let us say, Delhi and Mumbai today takes at least 3 to 4 days from Delhi to Mumbai, will start reaching in less than 18 hours in double stack containers on the dedicated freight corridor. And some of those trains will be run by the private sector also. Suddenly, why would anyone send any products or goods from Delhi to Bombay by truck? And because of that, because of the dedicated freight corridor, there will be much more capacity on the passenger line. Remember, the dedicated freight corridor is a dedicated line. So suddenly you'll be able to run much more passenger trains. And as you know, the Indian Railways is bidding out for private companies to run passenger trains on 101 routes. Our company has also applied for that. We'll evaluate whether we want to go with the opportunity. So actually, while the train sector, the rail sector has lost out in cargo, I expect a big bounce back in the next 5 to 10 years. And I expect a big improvement in passenger train capacity because of private sector operated trains also. On the roads, we already have 4-lane roads. Now suddenly we're going to have dedicated expressways. So I'm reminded of President Eisenhower in the US. In 1956, he passed the Federal Highway Grant Act, which essentially said that 90% of the interstates that we have in the US, expressways, will be funded by the federal government. Only 10% will come from the state government. And between 1956 and 1965, most of the interstate network was ready. So I expect that to happen in India over the next 10 years. I was saying this to Mr. Gadkari in a vote of thanks, that in the next 7 to 10 years, we'll have our interstate system ready. He said, nahi, Shailesh ji, ye 5 saal mein ho jayega. So both trains and roads will change for the better before 2030. Back to you, Utpal ji.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I hope you can spend another 10-15 minutes times for us.
I have no problem.
Okay.
You guys decide. Huh?
Thank you, sir. Actually, we are enjoying so much of your the discussions that we are engaged in. So the question that which was I was going to ask is from the student side. We all know that infrastructure is key to economic development, and it is also the second largest employer after agriculture. And it is also a fact that infrastructure development is always marred by bureaucratic hurdles and problems related to land acquisitions and so forth and so forth. And of course, the government of India from time to time have taken their steps to remove these hurdles. They've initiated a lot of reforms, and that's what we see the roads that we have seen in the recent times. I think a lot of infrastructure road development happened when Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the Prime Minister of India. So, sir, you are the right person to ask my question, which I'm going to ask you, because you had experience in the government. Now, of course, you are in the private sector related to infrastructure. What do you think more reforms to be introduced in India with respect to infrastructure development, so that some of the hurdles which are there right now, if not, they can be totally eliminated, but they can be substantially tackled for our betterment?
That's a very good question. And now let me talk about some cautions which could derail this entire story. I would say that, while I am always optimistic and that's the only way to be, otherwise, why would you get out of bed in the morning? There are some risk factors. And as I said, one should keep an open mind for the good as well as the bad. And how do we overcome those risk factors? So according to me, the biggest risk factor that we have in India is our judiciary. Judicial risk in India is perhaps the biggest thing holding back quick economic development for business. Because, you talked about the ease of doing business rankings in an earlier session. One of the ease of doing business rankings talks about contract enforcement. And this is not a very glamorous thing to know, but contracts matter. And those countries that enforce contracts will always progress. Those countries which do not enforce contracts it's almost like trying to run a race with both your feet tied. So contract enforcement matters. If the student has a contract with NITIE that they will pay you whatever 10 lakhs for 2 years of fees, and you will give them an education, and after they pay you, you say, sorry, I'm not going to give an education. That is a breach of contract. No system can flourish like that. And I'll just say this. The government consists of three figures. One is the legislature, which we elect every 5 years. One is the executive, our ministers and our elected and appointed officials. And one is the judiciary. Judiciary is as much part of government as the legislature and the executive. And we definitely need speedy justice and improvement in the way judiciary does dispute resolution. And I'm happy to say that even there, a lot of good things are happening. There is a national e-courts mission. And if all goes well, that e-courts mission is going to transform the way our courts function. And I'm also happy to say that because of COVID and coronavirus, a lot of honorable judges have really transformed them and digitalized their courts. So I think that is the first risk. It's not only in infrastructure. If any of you set up a business and you supply a product or a service, and then you don't get the money, then your business does not flourish. And the different approaches in Singapore, there is no concept of a check. So everything is online bank transfer. There is no concept of a check bouncing. In Dubai, if a check bounces, you go to jail. The person who is given the check, there are no exceptions. In India, if the check bounces, it is the beginning of negotiations. Acha, bank does not have balance, 1 lakh, please take 20,000. This is no way to run an economy. And we are talking about going to the third largest economy. So please see how all of us can improve contract enforcement in India. And the judicial system is nothing but a dispute resolution mechanism. Let it start resolving disputes. Passports took forever 6 years ago. Now they come in 15 days. Why can't we get quicker justice? So that's the first. The second big risk is city governance, the way our cities are governed. And you're from Kolkata, Utpal Babu. There was one mayor for 2 terms in Kolkata who really improved the way Kolkata as a city was. Where is the mayor in Bangalore? Where is the mayor in Mumbai? So maybe we need to see how cities outside run. And I'm not talking about London and Paris and New York. Those cities have nothing to offer us as of today because they are not growing at 2.5% every year and doubling in size every 15 years. They are now declining in population. But something like a Seoul, we should, because of the president of Seoul, change because the mayor of Seoul. So while all of you know about the prime ministers of India's name, I hope all of you know the prime minister of India's name. Almost all of you will know the chief minister of your state. Very few of you will know the mayor of your city. And this is absurd. Cities in India can only prosper when they have local political champions. They cannot be. And that is the one key learning that we should take from this coronavirus. Cities did not have political leadership. Which a city leader in your city stood up and said, we will fight corona together? This happened in all cities across the world. And the saddest part was I was in a conference of mayors, and this Bangladeshi gentleman came up to an Indian mayor. He was a Bangladeshi mayor. He said, "Saab, हमारे इधर mayor राज है, आपके इधर commissioner राज है. That is why our cities are doing better." So that's a second threat that we need to counter. And the third is actually tied to this second threat. The third is that execution risk is never at the state capital, let alone the union capital. Execution risk is where I am executing. And there you need some political ownership. So the local district magistrate and the local superintendent of police are not enough. And what do? We work with people who can help quicker execution. That's a suboptimal system. And today, if you take any infrastructure project, let us take the metro project in Mumbai, or the bridge across the sea, or the Navi Mumbai airport. Navi Mumbai airport, construction of the Navi Mumbai airport is not going to take more than 36 months. Because constructing an airport, whether in Hawaii or in Philippines or in Navi Mumbai, is exactly the same set of activities. When you put on your yellow jacket, there is no difference. It is before you put on your reflective jacket that the approvals take so much time. And those approvals, how can we short circuit it? And of course, now the most favorite thing is the company that loses a contract sponsors a public interest litigation to delay the execution of the contract. So anyway, there are several risks, but I am sure that many of these risks were much worse 20 years ago. We have solved those risks. And I keep saying, I said this in a town hall to my company the other day, that sometimes we try to solve the wrong problem. 5 years ago, toll plazas in India had a huge problem of queuing. Half an hour it used to take to cross a toll plaza. So we tried to see how we can optimize, how we can increase the number of lanes. One digital toll payment and all the queues are gone. So sometimes technology solves a lot of problems. Let me end with my favorite story on this. Cities in 1900 had mass public transport. What was the mass public transport in horse-drawn carriages? All right? Because everyone in every city in the world used to go from place A to place B on horse-drawn carriages, apart from those who could walk. So which was the single biggest urban problem in 1900? It was actually horse dung. Because when you have 20,000 horses in a city, they will emit their effluent. So what do you do with that dung? So you had mountains of dung in cities. So in 1895, Google it. There was an international conference on urbanization in New York. And they had scheduled this conference for 10 days. And point number one to discuss, how do you solve this horse dung problem? So after 4 days, the conference gave up in 1895, saying we cannot solve this problem. And exactly 10 years later, in 1905, Henry Ford came with the Model T car. So by 1910, almost all these horse-drawn carriages were history. So sometimes technology has a habit of changing a lot of things that we take for granted. I am personally monitoring this mass rapid transit technology, which might be implemented in the next 5 years. And if implemented, Akash Chawla can walk out of his hostel room and in 5 minutes get into this 2-seater or 4-seater and press a button, and he will be at Nariman Point in 10 minutes directly without stopping anywhere. So suddenly a lot of our assumptions on urban transport, on metros, on buses will all go for a toss. We are living in interesting times.
Thank you, sir. The way you explain and the kind of optimism that is a part of your discussions. In fact, one or two points which are very close to my heart and that came up during your discussion is that I always believe that development has to be demanded. Development has to be localized. It cannot be perhaps done in a top-down approach. It cannot perhaps done in a centrally manner. And if the involvement of the local people, whether they are elected people, whether they are bureaucrats, whether they are even the ordinary people who are concerned with their day-to-day life, which is affecting for lack of projects or lack of infrastructure, if they are all become a part of it, obviously much of development is not doing. So with this actually, I think we have come to, with this, my comments actually. I really in agreement with you. That's what I wanted to say. And I think, sir, you have some questions in Twitter. Sir, I think you are muted.
It's 12:09 and I don't want to overstay my welcome.
Okay.
But there are two questions on
Twitter. Yeah, please.
The first is, what reforms should be taken up by the private sector and government to improve the efficiency, visibility, and capital optimization of the infrastructure sector? And the second question from Reshu is, what has it been like for the transition from an MBA graduate to the IAS to being a business leader? So I'll spend time on both questions and I will say thank you thereafter.
Thank you, sir. Please go ahead.
What are the reforms are needed? A lot of reforms are happening from government. We in the private sector need to step up with some reforms. And where you depend, there's an old saying, where you stand depends on where you sit. So if today Utpal Babu is in the faculty of NITIE, he will be giving one perspective. Tomorrow, if he's in NITI Aayog in Delhi, he'll be giving another perspective. So where you stand depends on where you sit. But we in the private sector need to improve our governance practices. The focus on ESG, environmental, social governance issues are increasing across the world. And if we do not adhere to the highest standards of ESG, we are only hurting our own chances of success. And let me just give a small example from our own company. Larsen and Toubro is a big company by all means. We are spread across construction, technology, engineering, finance, oil and gas. Yesterday I was talking about what we are doing in Africa. We have done 28 projects in only power transmission and distribution in Africa. L&T has commissioned from concept to commissioning a 13-kilometer light rail transit metro system in Port Louis, Mauritius. 2 years. 2 years. Why can't we do this in India? So I ran a Twitter poll on why we were able to achieve it there and why we are not able to achieve it here. And number one, are not able to achieve it here. And number one was right of way and land. Number two was public interest litigation. So my favorite saying on, fooled by randomness. Then he came up with the black swan. Then he's written books like Skin in the Game and Anti-Fragile. So if you guys have not read Taleb, Taleb, Nassim, Nassim Taleb, I would strongly recommend. So he has a very favorite saying. He says, in theory, there is no difference between theory and practice. In practice, there is. In practice, there is a lot of difference between theory and practice. So in your life, be a practitioner, don't be a theoretician. So that's the first book. The second book that I found very helpful is called Factfulness. Fact, F-A-C-T, fullness. And it changes the way you look at the world. Without facts, what we believe is what gets hyped up in the media, depending on the media that you consume. And the media will always report that a man bit a dog. It will never report a dog bit a man. That is the way the media is programmed. It will sensationalize. So you need to get the facts, not the sensation. Factfulness. And the third book that I would recommend is The Art of Thinking Clearly by a chap called Ralph Dobelli. And he says, never trust a news anchor. Those of you who are fond of TV news, check it out. Again, it'll be somewhere in my Twitter feed. But talking about my personal journey, well, I was very fortunate to come straight to ICICI from IIM, and I was in investment banking. And for 4 years, I flew around the country and, you know, worked at whatever I could. And then I wrote the GMAT in 1988 because I wanted to go to Wall Street. But somewhere along the line, I met some decent people and thought that maybe this is worth a try. And maybe I got a good state. And I spent the next 16 years there in the government, which was very, very fulfilling. But I wanted to specialize in infrastructure and cities, which is why I returned to the private sector. So it was, as a British friend described, I was according to him, a poacher turned gamekeeper turned poacher, right? But again, the qualities that I talked about, where you stand depends on where you sit. The qualities that will help you everywhere is quick learning and an open mind. So I'm expecting more of you to send in your questions on my Twitter feed, even after this session is over, which will add to my learning from this session. And I will only say, you're a bunch of very smart people. Just remember that working hard is important. A little bit of luck is also important. But as I said right in the beginning, this is the luckiest generation of Indians ever since 1947. This is the best time to be born in India. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Really, I'm sure my students have learned a lot. I really liked the words you said towards the end. Of course, I liked all the words you said today, but particularly towards the end, that opening your mind, actually, really, the conversation with us has opened up our minds. And not only that, I think it has opened our hearts also. So thank you, sir, for accepting our invitation and being a part of this Prerana Business Meet 2020, which is an integral part of Avartan 2020. So hope we'll be in touch, and I hope our students and our institute will have the opportunity to invite you, maybe possibly in a different situation, maybe physically you come to our campus. L&T is so close to us, and I invite you on behalf of this institute, on behalf of students, please do visit our campus, and hope we'll have an interactions like this in future as well. So with this, I now over to you, Akash.
Thank you, sir. It was indeed an enriching experience to listen to your words of wisdom, sir. Thank you so much for the kind words. I would like to conclude the session by thanking Mr. Shailesh Pathak for his invaluable time. We are privileged to have listened to your perspective, and I believe all of us who have listened to you today have been grateful for the same. I would also like to thank the NITIE fraternity, especially our director, Professor Manoj K. Tiwari, sir, and Dean Student Affairs, Professor Hema Date ma'am, for supporting us to make the event such a success. I would also like to thank the moderator, Professor Utpal sir, for moderating the session in such a seamless manner. Finally, I would like to invite the organizing team, the Prerana Management Group members, and the faculties to click a virtual photograph with the guest. With your permission, sir.
Thank you, organizing committee. And I hope not too many of you looked at the WhatsApp while the lecture was on.
No. Definitely no, sir. I think there could not have been a better end to Prerana Business Meet than this session.
Thank you so much.